animal byproducts to create fuel. Another one is to use animal manure to generate power. You may have heard of anaerobic digesters. Those are used in conjunction with these manure lagoons to capture the methane emissions and use that to power the facility. Now, those types of strategies may be a start. You know, it's something. They're doing something to control this problem. However, they do very little to address the environmental problems inherent in industrial production. More robust solutions would require transforming the way we produce meat, egg, and dairy products, and transforming our consumption patterns. And I think the topic of consumption comes up a lot when we talk about climate change, whether we're talking about how we consume energy, how we consume food. And this brings us to what we refer to as the 3 R's. One strategy is to refine production, and that means to shift away from these intensive industrial systems to more extensive traditional systems, such as the one pictured here with animals actually raised on pasture in smaller numbers. Organic agriculture systems have the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and sequester carbon, and research has been done specifically on the topic of organic agriculture, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Some studies have suggested that the production of organic beef with cattle raised on grass rather than on concentrated feed might emit 40% less greenhouse gas emissions and consume 85% less energy than conventionally raised cattle. Animals raised on pasture require less fuel for the operation and less feed than they do in a confinement operation. Consumers who purchase meat, egg, and dairy products can help move the market from intensive systems towards extensive systems by not buying products from factory farms, by seeking out products that were produced more sustainably. Now here, this is where we get to consumption. The authors of the FAO report that I've been talking about, Livestock's Long Shadow, in their conclusion say, if the projected future demand for meat products is to be met, it's hard to see any alternative other than further intensifying farm animal production. So in that sense, it is clear that we can't continue on our current path if we're going to meaningfully decrease this sector's contributions to climate change. And that brings us to the other 2 R's. Replacing. Replacing meat, egg, and dairy products with plant-based foods is an extraordinarily effective strategy, not just to deal with the animal welfare problems we were talking about earlier, but also to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. A 2007 article in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition notes vegetarian and vegan diets could play an important role in preserving environmental resources and in reducing hunger and malnutrition in poorer nations. Similarly, a 2007 position paper by the American Dietetic Association states that dietitians can encourage eating that is both healthful and conserving of soil, water, and energy by emphasizing plant sources of protein and foods that have been produced with fewer agricultural inputs. It's also important that we do what we can to reduce the distances our food travels. And that means making every effort to purchase goods that were produced locally, and patronizing farmers markets, meeting the people who grow our food. And finally, the 3rd R is just to reduce the amount of meat, egg, and dairy products in our diet. Again, looking at land animal populations, there are 63 billion farm animals raised around the world each year, 10 billion of whom are in the United States. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has even noted that greenhouse gas emissions from farm animals are inherently tied to farm animal populations because they're either directly or indirectly the source of the emissions. The Lancet, which is the leading independent medical journal, published an article last September, in which the authors state, for the world's higher income populations, greenhouse gas emissions from meat eating were warrant the same scrutiny as do those from driving and flying. And the authors there recommend a reduction in meat consumption to 90 grams per person per day, which is about the equivalent of a single beef hamburger patty. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the group that incidentally won the Nobel Peace Prize last year along with Al Gore. Recently, the head of the IPCC stated, "Please eat less meat. Meat is a very carbon-intensive commodity," adding that consuming large quantities was also bad for one's health. And this was in an article where he was asked, what are some tips that you would provide to individuals to take a step to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And he listed 3 things. He said, drive less, shop less, and eat less meat. Finally, this is timely, this week is National Public Health Week, which is an event sponsored by the American Public Health Association. This year's theme is climate change, understandably. And the APHA has drafted what they call a healthy climate pledge that they're asking website visitors to sign on to. And they list 5 recommendations for things, I pledge I will do this to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And if you scroll down, the 3rd one down is to eat differently, to eat less meat and buy local produce from our community farmers markets. By the year 2050, global farm animal production is expected to double from its present levels, with most of these increases happening in the developing world. Now, we're already seeing what's happening as a result of the 63 billion farm animals we raise every year. So just think about what that's going to be like in terms of doubling it within the next 40 years. So we can and we must act now if we're going to do something to change the path that we're on. Just as we're playing a major role in climate change and in other environmental issues our planet is facing, we have the power to change our habits for the better. Because these environmental issues that we've talked about are ultimately a threat to all animals. Attention to climate change has moved us to start changing our habits. People are thinking more about the amount that they drive, the amount that they fly. People are, converting their light bulbs, thinking more about energy uses at home. And our food consumption practices are another one of these things that we have to take a closer look at, evaluate, and think about changing. This is a poster and an ad that we've been placing, and we have some copies out here as well today for anyone who's interested. Again, just calling attention to the fact that we are talking about consumption issues when we talk about climate change. Consumption of energy and consumption of food should be spotlighted just as equally. I thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you to Compassionate Action for Animals, EcoWatch, MPERD for organizing this. I'm happy to take any questions.